Hello, hello, and welcome to day 12 of the Unity Game Development Journal. This is where I'm building out a game using Unity, C Sharp, Tile Program, Photoshop, anything that sort of helps out this. Typically, most of the stuff is free so far. Photoshop I already had through work, so that's obviously you pay for that, but I already had it. Tiled is free, Tile to Unity is free. Unity itself is free in the version that I'm using. The mono develop is free in the version because it comes to Unity. So a lot of this stuff is just seeing how an indie game can be developed for a low budget. Um, anyways, I'm gonna start sort of like I start most of these things, just showing how far I've come with the sprite sheets. Today I worked on a brand new sheet for the character actually lifting items. So I have the front one done, which it takes about 11 frames, 3 frames for the actual lift, and then 8 typical walking frames. But instead of a normal walk, he is now carrying something, so it's just a different animation. So I'm going to need all 4 views, excuse me, front, side, or both sides, and then the back. So working on that takes a little bit of time, but it's getting there, so quite happy with it. The game I've done quite a bit. I did a lot of refactoring as well as I changed the way the cutscene handles the zoom. It still zooms the same, but what I did was instead of having one zoom setting for the entire cutscene, I've moved all of that code over to individual. I wonder if I can get that in the database. I moved it all over to the individual dialogues. So in the dialogue class itself, that's where I set the target camera ortho and the camera move speed. And I changed this to camera move speed because I'm also going to have it set a vector 2 position. I think I can do a vector 2 position and serialize it for the camera position. If it needs to be vector 3, we can't serialize that, so I'm going to have to just do some floats and assemble that object on this side of the serialization. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm heading with that camera thing. So now I have full control based on who's talking on where the camera is or zoom level. So if someone's talking about a certain tree, go see this tree, I can actually shoot the camera over to the tree, zoom in on it so you can see what the tree looks like, and then come back to the conversation, all based on each dialogue point that the character walks through, or that the player walks through. So that's really cool. Another thing I did was I changed the way that, let's go to the cutscene controller. I changed the way that the static class for the game controller works. So now I can just call game controller from anywhere, and I created the static instance or the static parameter or whatever. Why can't I think of the name? Variable or whatever you want to call it. I labeled that as call so that when I'm actually writing this stuff out, I can read it very clearly, so you can walk through the code and read it. That's probably the most important thing when writing code is if you can actually read it. So it just says gamecontroller.call start cutscene. Okay. Now this is one way of doing it. So if I go into the game controller, we can sort of look. The other way of doing it is, see, I have here this public static, and I just give a variable name call to this game controller, and that way I can do gamecontroller.call and then I can list any of these methods here. Now the alternative way of doing that is to actually give the methods the static, make the methods static themselves, so that I can just simply call game controller dot so it wouldn't be those, it would be like game controller dot get game state, right? And that way I don't have that little middle word there that in my case I'm using call, so I can get rid of that if I wanted to. The problem is, and the reason why I didn't do it in this particular class, is this is a massive class. It's even going to get bigger than this, and I don't want to. I want to have a little bit of play here on how I organize the methods. I don't want everything to be static for it to work, so that's why I have that call method in there. Just a little bit easier, I think, for me to do that right now. So anyways, I spent some time doing that. And then the next thing I did was I started working on the persistence layer, meaning how I'm going to keep track of what the character or what the player has done in this game save, and so we can load different saves in and then save to a file and all that kind of stuff. So I started that system, and I actually did it because I want the cutscenes to be turned on or off depending on if the character is that far along in the story. So one thing I did in the cutscene database, at the very top of a cutscene, I say I'm calling the state of the player, like how far the player has gotten in the story, progression. So that's the parameter I'm using, or the name I'm using for that progression. So in the cutscene database, I set this integer here that says it's for progression, and I set it to 0 here. This is obviously going to change, but just to test it out right now, I'm saying if anyone is at progression 0, then show them this cutscene. If they're at progression like 5 or 6 in the game, then this is not the right cutscene for them. This was supposed to be shown to them a long time ago, so don't show it to them, type of thing. Or if they are progression, 1, and this cutscene is for progression 10, don't show it to them because they're not that far along in the story yet, or something along those lines, right? I can have a little bit more fine tuning of the actual cutscenes that way. So how that works is in the cutscene controller, before on trigger enter, what I'm doing here is I added a couple things. First thing I added, which I needed before, is this checking to see if the actual person colliding with this is a player. Before, it could have been an enemy or something walking into it, or an NPC walking into it. It would have set it off, and that's not very good. So I have this check if it's the player. If it's the player, it's going to do this this cutscene, and it also checks if the cutscene for progression is equal to the game data progression. And game data is a brand new serialized class that I'm using. It's actually a static class, so I can call it from anywhere. And I can set different attributes or parameters to it and pieces of data. In this case, like I said, we're using progression as seeing how far along the character is or the player is. So I'm just checking that. Is the cutscene progression the same as the actual game progression? And if it is, then I can call the cutscene just like I did before. And then I also have this check here to say, is the cutscene for progression less than the game's progression? So if the game's progression is at like 10 and this cutscene's at 0, this is like, there's no need for this cutscene anymore. So if it is there, I just destroy it. So I do this destroy here. And I also changed the way I do the end down here. I have the game data.progression equal to the current progression of this cutscene plus 1. So I'm just saying we're done this one, so add 1 to the progression and move on with our lives. Then we have, this is just a debug logger to see if it's working right now. And then I have this game controller call and cutscene, which was there before. I had the dialog box to start the coroutine for zooming out, and then I destroy the game objects, which is different than the way I was doing this before. Before I was just shutting off enable. I was setting that to false. Now I think I'm going to actually destroy the game object here, similar to the way I was doing it up top if the number was smaller than the game data. And then once that happens, I'm doing this up here. Again, a lot of this stuff might change, but I'm really just trying to do it. So on destroy method is set off here when something is destroyed. So from here, I'm just setting null all these pointers to all these different things just to clean that up a little bit. And that's it. So those are the changes I made there. I'm pretty sure that's everything. Let's go ahead and take a look at it in the game. So I have in the console, I have it when we start this, it's going to hit the persistence manager, and it's just going to load all the data. I have nothing there. This is not actually hooked up to a file yet. This is all just the methods that I have debugs in. So it goes and hits this load method, so it tells me it hit it. And then it says the progression is at 0. That's the only data I have in there right now. So I can just move around here, and then when I hit the cutscene, it's going to do it like before. Boom, boom, boom. So that's exactly the same. And you can see that progression updated to 1 because we're done that cutscene. So now I can come up here, and I set this sign here. Before I had this interactable where it just it showed like a message, a text message. In this case, I just switched that out to be an interactable save instead of an interactable sign. So I created a new script called Interactable Save, and I attached that to this little sprite here just for testing purposes. So now if I go up and hit my interact button, down here you can see that the persistence manager is going to save, progression is saving at 1, and call to save game is done. Okay, so that just saved the game. That's how we can have little spots around the map that you can go up and interact with, and it'll save your progress. If I go here just quickly and change something in here, so we'll go over to the let's go over to the data here. I think I had it open. Cutscene, choice, game, no. Okay, so I'm just going to go into the progression data here, or persistence, sorry. I'll go into the game data class. So this is just going to be where all the different pieces that I'm going to save end up. So I have this static integer progression, and I'm going to go through and just set that, or this is like if we're saving it to a file, I'm just going to manually change that to 1. Okay, so what we're going to see here now that I changed that data is when I start it, it's going to load. Like I said, it's not actually loading, but it essentially just gets that data from the game data. And if I go over to here, you can see progression is 1, whereas before it started at 0. But now since I manually changed it to 1, it's at 1. And what we're going to see here is this cutscene down in the bottom right here. It says cutscenes, and then we have cutscene 1. What's going to happen is because that cutscene is set to 0, progression 0, and we are progression 1, they don't match up. So that's actually going to get destroyed, and we'll be able to see that just disappear off that bottom corner. So I'm going to hit it now, and you can see it disappear there. And there you go. So when I go up here, it didn't set anything. It didn't change the progression. We're still at 1. I can come up here, hit the save, and it still just saves it at 1 because we haven't really changed anything. So that's everything I worked on today. It's sort of a little bland, but it's the foundation for what's coming next. It's the foundation for how we're saving everything, managing cutscenes and all that. I'm trying to build this ecosystem for how the game's going to operate, the architecture of the game, I guess you could say. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.